All right, so it is 2 o'clock. I'll go ahead and begin. It looks like there's still more people filtering in. So, okay, let me begin. So today's speaker is Charlotte Hubbard, and her talk is Beyond the Bee's Knees. Hello, I'm Jacob Diljak from the Van Buren Conservation District, and I'd like to welcome you to our second Backyard Symposium. This week-long series is designated to help landowners of all sizes bring their yards to life as a beautiful, sustainable part of the environment. From backyards and lots in urban areas to rural homesteads, green space is beneficial for our mental and physical health, and for the animals and plants we share our space with. Through this series, we're going to learn actionable, approachable ways to help make your space a bit greener. In the chat, please introduce yourself and share what you'd like to learn, and feel free to interact there throughout the presentation. By default, all attendees are muted with their cameras off. This allows us to record these presentations to be uploaded to our YouTube channel for those who couldn't join us today. So I'll start off with the introductions. I'm Jacob Diljak. I work for the Van Buren Conservation District. I'm out here in the village of Pawpaw. And something that excites me about the Backyard Symposium is making a more friendly environment for the birds. I really love birds and and the squirrels around, the squirrels that live in the trees in my house, around my house, seem to benefit there as well. Now I'm going to read the introduction slide you see in front of you to go over some of the Zoom features that you can utilize during the presentation. So welcome to the Van Buren Conservation District's Backyard Symposium webinar series. Message us using the contact form on our website, vanburencd.org/contact-2/, or sign up for our newsletter using the subscribe option at the bottom of our website. This webinar is being recorded. Recorded webinars will be posted next week on our YouTube channel. That's www.youtube.com/user/vanburencd/videos. Follow us on Facebook at Van Buren CD. Live captioning is available. How to ask us questions. So click the Q&A icon to submit a question to the presenter. Type your question in the box and then hit the send button. Questions will be asked by the moderator at the end of the presentation. For help, use the little chat icon to reach out to me. I'll be named as BBC moderator in parentheses help for help using Zoom. And then you have a little icon down there showing me there. So with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will let you take over. There you go.
All right. And you see some honeycomb, right, Jacob?
Yes, I do. And Charlotte, I'm so sorry, I forgot to introduce you. So let me do that really quick. So today with us, we have Charlotte Hubbard. Charlotte has been keeping bees since 2018. She was named Michigan's 2018 Beekeeper of the Year. She is president of the Kalamazoo Bee Club, lead instructor for KVCC's beekeeping program, authors on 2 books on beekeeping, and very active in bee education and mentoring. You can visit her website, hubbardhive.com. That's HUBBARDHIVE. All profits go to charity. And I'll hand that back to you. My apologies.
No problem. Thank you. Just one minor update on that. I've been keeping bees since 2008.
2008. Okay, that
Yeah,
makes
no problem. Thank you for having me today. Thank you for letting me speak about one of my most favorite things in the entire world. I'm speaking to you from Portland, Oregon, where it's sunny and 65 degrees. And I love the power of Zoom. And I'm speaking to you from my daughter's bedroom at the far end of the house, but the cat has found me. So there might be two of us presenting here shortly, hopefully not. It's a day after Valentine's Day, and I'm going to tell you a love story today, folks, but I will warn you right now, the love story does not have a happy ending. So when you look at that honeycomb, you might see it there. You'll see it a little more. There is a heart that the bees made in that honeycomb, which I thought was pretty cool. Just to review who I am, president of the Kalamazoo Bee Club. We're a very active bee club in Southwest Michigan. Beekeeper of the Year for the state in 2018. I teach the classes at KVCC. We have an on-hands apiary there. I've written 2 bee books and lots of articles, and veterinarians are now required if you need an antibiotic for care of your honeybees, and sometimes you do. So I wrote a chapter for the textbook there, and I've taught beekeeping at 4 different colleges. So how did I get into this? Because that's usually one of the first questions that I get. And it is because of my husband, Tom, who is pictured here at the lower left here of your screen wearing a bee hat. Tom was the bee king. Tom wanted to be a master gardener and realized early on in that training that to be a successful gardener, you need lots of honeybees. So he wasn't happy about honeybees. He was dreadfully afraid of honeybees, but he got a couple hives and he put them in our backyard and he totally ignored them. That wasn't all that Tom ignored. Very scary applies to how he felt about honeybees. It also unfortunately applied to how he felt about anything medical. And I saw that he was ill, his family saw he was ill, his friends saw he was ill, and he was just very stubborn and said, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. But on Valentine's Day of 2008, he was diagnosed a week after he went to the doctor for the first time in nearly a decade. Finally went to the doctor and was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. The oncologist gave him, he was very sick at the time, gave him 6 to 8 weeks to live. And oh my goodness, denial is what got Tom in that position. And denial kept working because he was like, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm going to be fine. But honey, I need you to take care of my bees until I get better. So that's how I became a beekeeper. Didn't want to be a beekeeper, but to support my husband who was very, very ill, I decided to help keep his beloved insects alive. So that was pretty much my reaction. Not happy about it, but wasn't happy about a whole bunch of things going on at the time. So Tom and I sort of kept bees together. He didn't live the 6 or 8 weeks that the oncologist thought. He actually lived 18 months. And I think it's because the kids and I just loved him through it. The summer before he died, the honeybees were more prolific than they'd ever been. They were under my watch, but under his coaching. He never did work hives again. He never felt well enough. But that was 2008, 2009, before cell phones were readily and easily available. And but he'd get on the phone up there in the kitchen and kind of coach me and tell me what to do down the yard and what I should be looking for. That's just some of the harvest from our summer of successful beekeeping together. And it was a bittersweet summer. I think we all sensed that the end could be in sight, but we just lived every day and we were blessed to have every day that we could there together and enjoyed the moments, enjoyed the summer, enjoyed the honey, enjoyed the bees, enjoyed everything around us. Tom passed away the end of summer 2009. And I had to figure out what to do with myself because I'd been a caregiver for 18 months. We had 3 children. 2 were in college and 1 was working her first job way far away in Georgia. And I was a pretty young widow at the time, 48. And I was still working, but I needed something to keep me busy. And folks, honeybees have an amazing stinging way of reminding you to stay in the moment and focus on them. And when you're recently grieving someone, staying in the moment, I found is kind of the best way to get through things. So I took the original 2 hives that Tommy and I had worked, and I expanded to 5 hives. And it was pretty engaging, and I was pretty addicted. And I ran out of room in the backyard, so I put 3 on the roof of the garage. And that was pretty cool. And I was running out of roof on the garage or room on the roof of the garage. So I talked to my father, who had a fruit and vegetable farm, and I said, "Hey, can I put a couple hives on your garage roof also?" So I was running 8 to 10 hives, which is plenty of work for one person. And folks, there are very few times in beekeeping where you will need to run. But just as a caution, if you're on a roof, don't run. So I kept bees, was pretty engaged with bees, was finding it fascinating. I started to do a lot of bee outreach, a lot of speaking, a lot of training, a lot of getting involved with local bee organizations. One day when I was swimming back across the water, um, I love to swim on the pond outside of my house. There was a bee in the water, and I scooped her up on my hand. And I had done that quite frequently, and I figured she'd dry off and her wings would kind of, shake loose their water and she'd fly away. But no, luckily I'm a pretty good swimmer because I swam across the pond and I swam all the way back holding one hand out of the water. And she just hung out with me and we kind of communed together. And not to get all mystic and weird on you here, but I just thanked her because the honeybee species, in fact, the entire Hymenoptera family is so important to our planet. So I thanked her for all that she was doing for the world and all of her kind. And I also thanked her for what she did for me because I was fairly lost coming out of losing my husband and not sure of what my way forward was. And bees gave me a sense of purpose and a reason to plan and a reason to think ahead and start doing things. So I was beholden, and I jokingly say beholden. And there are lots of reasons that we should all be beholden because they're amazing insects. So I'm going to talk more about that today. So lots of things pollinate, and pollination is very important for propagation of plants. They need to be pollinated to reproduce. Lots of things pollinate, like bats and beetles and birds and butterflies, and flies pollinate, and moths and wasps, and a lot of things are wind pollinated. But there's only one thing that gives us what we love, and that's that golden honey, and that is Apis mellifera, or the honeybee. Honeybees pollinate hundreds, thousands of different plants, different things. But one of the things that they're best at pollinating are the foods that we love to eat. I'm a big fan of blueberry muffins and strawberries and peaches and cherries, apples, and honeybees are specifically designed to be very optimal in pollinating those things. In fact, pollination is so critical to all of us. 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat requires a pollinator. And some things like grains and corn don't require insect pollination, but who wants to eat those boring things all the time? Things that make coming to the table so delightful, like blueberries and cherries and peaches, require insect pollination. 1 out of every 3 bites of food. I'm going to give a brief overview today of why I find this insect so amazingly fascinating. And I'll start with, this is just a random shot of honeycomb filled with nectar. When honeybees are visiting plants, they are bringing in nectar and carrying that in their crop, which is a specially suited stomach. And while the nectar is in their crop, enzymes are automatically added from the bee's physiology, and it starts to transform that nectar into honey. That bee will bring it back to the hive, and she will pass it off to another honeybee right in the doorway through a process called trophallaxis. And that honeybee will take it into her crop, where it again gets mixed with enzymes and further starts the process toward being turned into honey. And that inside worker honeybee will carry that honey/nectar up through the colony and stick it in a honeycomb. And there are cells filled with nectar that will be transformed to honey over time. Here is what else you might find in a beehive. Of course, lots of bees, but all of this golden, yellow, greenish stuff that you see here is pollen. And the shiny stuff that you see there is nectar. And this capped stuff over here, the cells that have a wax cap on them, that is honey. And the bees have completely fermented the nectar and turned it into honey with the right moisture content. And they've put a wax cap over it to help it be sealed. But the other thing that bees do when they pollinate, besides collecting nectar, is collect pollen. Pollen is what they use to feed the nurse bees, and the nurse bees are the critical bees that feed the young developing larvae that will grow up to be bees. And one of the things that I find fascinating about honeybees and pollination is all the different colors of pollen that they can bring in. This is just a typical day, probably August. I tend to take a lot of pictures in the summer. But in Michigan, we have bees that collect all of these different colors of pollen. I rarely see blue, but when I've seen it, I've been fascinated by it. I've seen a lot of the red. And here is a photo I caught 2 years ago of a honeybee bringing in green pollen. And you can see it. They have what's called a pollen sac or a pollen saddle on their back legs. And that bright green is all pollen that she's collected out there and stuffed into her legs and brought into the colony. I have a neighbor who's an aeronautical engineer, huge title, PhD. And every year he has his students use math and explain why a honeybee can't fly. And this is a great picture of a honeybee that can't fly. She's carrying more than her weight in pollen, but yet she doesn't pay attention to the formulas that man likes to use to describe the earth. She just goes ahead and flies anyway. Here's another reason why I find honeybees fascinating. Homeowners don't find this as fascinating as I do. This is a structure that I did a cutout from last summer. That's called a cutout because you absolutely cut into it and remove the bees from that. And that's kind of what they look like in nature, just beautiful honeycombs, all 3/8 of an inch apart, because bees are very respectful of a whole lot of mathematical principles, and bees like bee space. So between each of these downward honeycombs was 3/8 of an inch so that two bees could pass and work back to back, side by side in there. There are generally 3 kinds of bees in a hive. You can call them kinds, you can call them caste, you can call them subcaste, lots of different terms. I just call them kinds. The queen bee, and there she is. The queen she is larger. She's about 40% larger in the abdomen than all the other bees in the colony, and lots of worker bees in here. And here is a drone. The third type is a drone or the male bee, and I'm going to explain each of these in detail. I'm going to start with the queen, and if you're a good spotter, plus I've got her pretty much lined up in the center, there is the queen bee right in the middle. There is usually only one queen bee per hive, and that queen bee only takes 1 or 2 flights her entire lifetime when she flies out to get mated. After that, she comes into the colony and she's an egg-laying machine. I used to think, oh, queen bee, I'd like to be the queen bee. That sounds great to be royalty, but it really isn't. That queen bee is surrounded by worker bees. Worker bees are non-fertilized females, and their fertilization apparatus has been changed to a sting apparatus. The queen bee is attended to by the worker bees all the time. They're always smelling her, touching her, transferring her pheromones throughout the colony to keep them calm. But they also touch her and smell her to make sure she's not hungry, or they'll bring her food. Thirsty, they'll bring her water. If she needs to defecate, she does that in the colony and they carry it outside the colony because they want her very focused on the one thing that she's supposed to do, which is create more bees. So she will lay during the season 1,500 to 2,500 eggs per day, and they keep her very, very focused on that. And when she starts to fail, they'll replace her. A queen will only live 2 to 5 years, and frequently not that long, because of the use of chemicals and because of some of the diseases that are prevalent in our honeybees and other bee species right now. A queen is typically only living about 1 or 2 years before a colony needs to replace her. The bee that you find the most in the colony is the worker bee. It's typically at least 80% of the population, and this time of year, it is about 99% of the population. A colony typically won't keep drones through the winter, which I'll explain in a little bit. And the worker bees are these smaller bees here, and again, you see them tending to the queen. The worker bees have a variety of different jobs. in the flying season, which is going to be what, March, April through October, November, depending on when winter comes, they will live about 42 days and they die when their wings wear out. They live longer than that in the winter because they're not actively flying. But across those 42 days of active adult life, they will spend about 21 days inside the colony where they do a variety of jobs like take care of eggs and larvae and pupa and chase out any predators and build wax and remove dead bees and store honey and pollen. And then about their 21st day, they go to the front of the colony and they launch themselves out and they become foragers for hopefully the next 21 days when they'll go out and collect nectar and pollen and water and propolis for the colony. The third type of bee that you will frequently find is the drone. And I do love to talk about drones. They're just cool, and drones don't sting. So when you look at this photo, here is the drone, and above him is one of his sisters or half sisters. And here is another sister. So a drone has the really super cool wraparound sunglasses. You can see another drone down here, and they're just like more rectangular, more beefy. And a drone has one purpose, and that sole purpose is to mate with a virgin queen from a different colony. So a drone typically doesn't mate with a virgin queen from his colony. During the summer, and when the weather's nice, that drone will go out to what's called a drone congregation area, or a DCA. And you can kind of think of it maybe as a place to meet and mingle. And a drone will just fly around that DCA for 15, 20, 30 minutes, hoping a virgin queen from a different colony will fly through. And if so, he'll hop on top of her if he's lucky. A drone has about a 1 in 10,000 chance of successfully mating. Not too good. But if he is lucky enough to mate, that drone will have his genitalia ripped out and he will fall to his death, which doesn't sound like a great ending. But the optional ending is he doesn't successfully mate. And so he'll fly back home and his sisters will take care of him. And the next day they'll dust him off and shine back his fur, and they'll send him out because he is how they can promote the genetic composition of their colony. And this will happen day after day after day throughout the summer. And then come fall, oh my goodness, then the drone isn't lucky. If he wasn't lucky enough to mate, he's going to die in the cold, because a drone can be made by any bee. The queen bee can make a drone, a worker bee can make a drone. So we don't need drones because remember, they only have one purpose. So all winter long, they're just going to consume resources that the colony might need. So come fall, usually about October, you'll find drones outside the hive. And it's because their sisters just don't let them in when it gets cold and they perish in the cold. A queen bee will mate with anywhere from 15 to 50 or 60 drones when she's out on one of those couple mating flights. And that's why when you see a variety of bees in the colony, they truly are a variety. They're typically half sisters. They will have different fathers because that gives them different genetic characteristics. Some characteristics of the bees might be better foragers, some might be better guard bees, some might be better honey producers. So the queen likes to mate with a variety of drones to get that genetic representation. So let's talk about where bees typically live, and it's in hives. And those that are kept bees are typically kept in a colony type called a Langstroth hive. I paint mine light colors, and there's what those hives look like from the outside. If you've seen them commercially, they're typically white, which is understandable. They're easier to maintain, don't have to worry about matching colors. Okay, so that's what they look like from the outside. When you pick up the lid and look down in them, there are frames. I run 10 frame colonies, which is 10 frames across. 8 frame is more popular. And those frames are essentially that. It's a frame of wood that has honeycomb in the middle. And that honeycomb is used for brood, the babies, and honey, nectar, pollen storage. This is a photo of a colony recently installed, a colony that recently got started. And about 2 months later, when I opened that same colony, Oh my goodness, they are busy as bees and they have reproduced greatly. So how does one go about becoming a beekeeper? Well, the first step is obtaining bees. And there are three ways you can get bees. You can purchase them, and that is what I strongly recommend. For example, if you want fish for dinner, are you going to go fishing or are you going to go to the grocery and buy it? I would suggest going to grocery because you never know what your fishing luck might be. And if you really want to keep bees, I would suggest you start out by purchasing them. Bees come in two configurations for purchasing. You can buy this, what's called a package, and that is about 10,000 bees in a cage that looks similar to that, one queen bee. And here I was visiting the factory where they have them all packaged up and ready to ship out. It's just fascinating. Packages cost anywhere from $150 to $200. Optionally, you can start beekeeping by buying a nucleus hive, which is typically 3, 4, or 5 frames in a box, and they cost closer to the $200 price range. Another way, once you get bees, you've got to get them home and get them inside the hive. And I share this picture with you because that is me on my first bee install, doing absolutely everything wrong. I had watched the video on how to install bees, but the bees did not watch the video, and they were not doing what they were supposed to do. I had a couple neighbors, also total rookies, helping me. Normally, the bees are all supposed to go in the box. They didn't, but you know what? It all worked out. A year later, here I am installing bees again. And you know what? There aren't bees all over the place. Almost the same date, almost the same weather. And big difference, I think, was my attitude and my confidence. A lot of education. Learned a lot that first year. I've been doing it since 2008. I'm still learning way too much, but bees are wonderful teachers. So the second way that a lot of people like to obtain bees is a swarm, which is an interesting way to get bees. Swarms can be problematic. They're often located way up on tops of trees. They might be carrying disease. You can get lots of bees that way, but you got to make sure you get the queen bee because she's the fertilized one that can actually lay eggs to turn into more bees. Bees swarm for a couple reasons. They will swarm if they're overpopulated for their area. Remember that photo I showed you of the beehive inside a house? I'm not sure how long they could have successfully lived there. They still had some room to build, but I think they would not have successfully lived there more than a year because that was a pretty small cavity. Bees will also swarm if it turns out it's a bad location. Here's a photo of a beekeeper holding bees, and I think it's required bee law that when you get a swarm of bees, you just have to hold it and look at it because it's just so fascinating. So what happens when a colony decides to swarm is the older queen, they don't have a new queen yet, they're going to make a new queen, but the older queen leaves, taking a little over half the workforce with her. And generally, they're very docile, unless a kid's been throwing rocks at them or they've had some other disruption. But generally, they're pretty loaded up with honey and they're pretty docile. And if you are lucky enough to catch them, you can usually just hold them and look at them and check them all out. If you see a swarm and you'd like it to go away, please, please, please call a beekeeper. And there's some resources I will share later that will tell you how to get hold of a beekeeper. We will happily rehome those bees. Another way that you can obtain bees, not a way I'd recommend because it is fraught with danger and difficulty and requires all sorts of specialty tools, but again, it's fascinating, and that is to remove bees from structures. I got a call early April one spring from an apartment complex in downtown Kalamazoo, Michigan, and they said, hey, we have some bees in the wall, and every time people walk by, they're afraid they're going to get stung or attacked. Could you remove these bees? And I said, yeah, sure, but why don't you tell me more about this location? Because I needed to know what kind of equipment to bring. And there was a long hesitation by the apartment complex manager. And finally she said, they're on the first floor. And I was thrilled because removing stinging insects when you're up on a ladder, not the best thing to do, but I was happy about that first floor removal and loaded up the truck and got some beekeepers to help me. And here we are removing bees from the first floor of the apartment complex, which just goes to show you in downtown Kalamazoo, I guess we start at the top and count our way down. That was, I did a lot of climbing the ladder. That's me waving on the right and another beekeeper helping me on the left. And the bees were in behind that siding there. We got them out and that was a fabulous hive. Moved them back to my backyard where they stayed happily for 5 years. I love doing bee removals, so I want to share a couple pictures of some of my favorite removals. This woman found us on the internet and she said, wow, I never knew that I could get rid of these bees. These bees had been living in her house for 20 or 30 years. And what finally got her searching for folks that would remove bees again is she had grandchildren. And there's a trampoline located right in front of this beekeeper. And the bees were flying in and out under that window. And honeybees are very, well, they work hard as bees. They're busy as bees. And every time a little kid jumped up and down on that trampoline, they might interrupt the flight path of the bees. And if bees got tangled in hair, then the bee would freak out and sting the child. It just wasn't a good situation. So she talked to us about removing bees and she said, and mind you, she's telling us, two beekeepers, she said the bees are located just under that window, which didn't seem right to me, but truly we could tell that bees were coming and going from under that window. And so we, with her permission, of course, we removed the paneling, got the bee vacuum. One of us sat on the roof, vacuumed up bees, sent them in a kitty litter bucket down to the beekeeper on the ground. Beekeeper on the ground dumped the bees in, sent the bucket back up. We did this all morning long. And as a beekeeper, I was thrilled because every time I vacuumed up a bucket full of bees and I sent it to the ground, by the time the bucket got back up, it was filled up, not the bucket, but that cavity where I was vacuuming from was filled up with bees again. So I knew this was a colossal nest of bees. It was huge. The homeowner stopped by. She had smartly left for the day, stopped by late morning. She said, how's it going? And we explained to her that we were pretty sure the bees went a lot further than just under that window. And we explained why. And she said, oh my goodness, now that you mention it, I have had honey dripping through my kitchen ceiling for a couple years now. Sure enough, and this is a picture of her honey ceiling in the kitchen. Can't really see it real well here, but they kept putting up sheets of some sort of board to try to barricade that way. And of course, the honey would always find a way and seep through and drip down in the kitchen. The kitchen was located over here, so we gave the homeowner a couple options. We could cut up through the ceiling to get the bees out. We could cut down through the bedroom floor, or we could just close up and go away. And she's like, no, 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 let's do it. So we ended up, had to go home, get lots more equipment, waited until another day, which unfortunately was 86 degrees and terribly humid. But on that day, we cut through the floor of the bedroom to remove the bees. And here is what we found. That was her floor. Just so much in there, not only honeybees and wax and comb and sawdust from cutting into the floor, but Barbie doll shoes and marbles and dimes and little wheels off of vehicles that had fallen in there over the years. And it was so fascinating. Over here is that window that she thought the bees were under. And every time I was outside that window vacuuming from the outside, all the bees in here were just slowly getting sucked toward that window. So we cut open the floor. The bees went across 3 floor joists and 6 or 8 feet back from the window. Just a massive, wonderful hive, safely relocated elsewhere. Yes, there is an intersection where farmers and crazy people overlap, and that's us beekeepers, folks. So let's talk about speed. How fast do honeybees fly? By the way, this doesn't usually happen in beekeeping. This is just something that happens at bee events. It's kind of a cool thing. And bees aren't usually particularly stingy when they are set up in these conditions. There's actually an international competition to see who can hold the most bees. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of bees, and they're pretty heavy and they're pretty warm. Anyway, bees run about 15 miles an hour. And you know, the average human runs about 15 miles an hour. So if you see a honeybee running from it, probably not going to work out that well. I suggest you stop and say hello and slowly back away and give her space. I used to speak a lot to kids groups back when I could go out and speak to kids groups, and I was always asked the same questions. And kids always ask, do I get stung? And what do you do if you see a bee? And I explained to them, don't be a bear. You see, a bear is the natural predator of a honeybee colony. A bear will rip open the lid and destroy their home and start eating the honey. So honeybees, whenever they see something that's moving quickly and ripping open their lid and acting aggressively, honeybees will instinctively know to sting that. And so you don't want to act like a bear when you're around a honeybee. It's hard not to do it, but you don't want to make that swatting away motion because that awakens a primal instinct. Instead, just calmly walk away. I've written a book called If I Could Sit on a Bee's Knees, and it answers some of the most popular questions I get when I talk to kids. My website is coming up at the end. That book and another book I've written are for sale via my website, and they're also on barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. All the profits from my speaking, from my honey sales, from my teaching, and from the books and articles I write go to support food bank charities in memory of my husband. So how can you support pollinators? Because it's really important. 1 out of every 3 bites requires pollination. The biggest one, folks, is to minimize chemicals and pollution. Don't wash your car in the driveway. Don't use electricity until you need to. Don't like lawn chemicals. Lawns really don't help honeybees out very much. They're just a grass desert. We need things in the lawn, which I'll show you in a little bit. Support your local beekeeper. None of us are doing this for profit, believe me. Commercial folks are doing it for profit, and they're challenged to do that. Most of us local beekeepers are just doing it because we love the science, we love the biology, we love communicating with a fascinating insect. And if you buy honey from us, you know you're getting the real thing. Support land conservation. A lot of the land conservation groups are very focused on keeping wetlands and habitat for pollinators, and leave a corner of your yard or your ditches to be. When I was growing up in the 60s in Southwest Michigan, we didn't mow absolutely everything. We left a lot of the lawn vacant, and we left it in things so it could have goldenrod and all the other things that purple loosestrife and daisies and dandelions. It was just too much work to mow it all, but that was really pollinator friendly. I'm at the point now where, much to my neighbor's chagrin, I have things that pollinators like growing in my driveway. Instead of running over it, I just water it because I want to keep my pollinators happy. This is what I do every fall, plant a lot of tulip and crocus bulbs in my lawn. And that's because when honeybees survive the winter, and hopefully mine have all survived the winter, won't really know till April, they are desperate to fill up their nest. They went into winter with about 100 pounds of honey, and they might be running out by the time they eat that honey slowly through these hard winters. So I've got these first things blooming for them. A lot of the pollen that bees rely on comes from trees. So you don't need to plant flowers to support pollinators. You can also support trees or plant trees. Maples are a wonderful source of pollen, as is basswood, as is all of our stone fruit trees. Here is my backyard and lots of dandelions. Sorry, neighbors, but I love dandelions. In the summer, it'll be filled with lots of the white clover that bunny rabbits eat, and lots of bunny rabbits. And here are my tulips coming up in the spring to feed pollinators. Here are honeybees on dandelions. If dandelions are such a wonderful first flowering crop for honeybees, please, please, please let dandelions grow. At least not if your yard, let them grow somewhere, because we want our pollinators to get off to a great start in the spring, and dandelions can be a crucial part of that nutrition. Some other things you can do if you're a gardener, maybe you're just a container gardener. Anything that you can do to help pollinators helps all of the planet. Plant native plants, the things that grow well in our area so that they are there to nourish our pollinators. Plant things in swaths, like a lot of this echinacea or a lot of those black-eyed Susans. Honeybees like to be efficient pollinators. So if a honeybee wanders upon this echinacea and she sees there's a lot of it ready to be pollinated, she'll go back to the colony and with the waggle dance, tell her sisters to come and join her, and they will come in and make that garden rich with the hum and buzz of honeybees and those flowers robust through pollination. So planting in swaths helps bring lots of bees to that area. Plant so there's always something blooming. Chicago is one of the most bee-friendly cities in the United States because they plant intentionally for pollinators, and they have things blooming from the first part of spring well into October, all sorts of great plants, and allow plants to bolt. I know as a gardener, I'm tempted to pull them up when they're done, but if I let my onions go to seed, for example, then I'm letting them go to a useful part of their process that feeds pollinators. Here's honeybees with pollen in their pollen sacs. I just have lots of pictures of those. One of my favorite things is to go down to the colonies and look at bees bringing pollen in the spring and the summer and the fall. This is aster pollen coming in on the left. That's my maize and blue hive. When my first husband was dying of cancer, he put me in charge of cooking, which was fine, but I had never really cooked before. And one evening he said, here's chicken to go on the grill. Will you keep an eye on it? Absolutely. He wasn't feeling well. And I said, I'm just going to scamper down and check the beehives and put some more feed on the hive. And I went down there and I saw pollen. I saw some pink pollen and some opal colored pollen and some light green pollen. And when I got back, that's what we had for dinner because, yeah, honeybees are fascinating. Few fun facts about honey. The flavor of honey will vary by floral sources. That's why orange blossom honey, typically from colonies located in orange blossom, has a fairly unique flavor. All pure honey crystallizes, but the rate of that crystallization will vary by the floral source. I've had some honey that will crystallize in a week. I've had some honey since 2008 that still hasn't crystallized. It depends on the floral source, how fast it will crystallize. And if it crystallizes, it's still perfectly fine. In fact, a lot of folks like that crunchy texture. It's a little more manageable, but you can reheat it, put it in hot water. You don't want to go above 108 because that diminishes the nutritious properties of it. But just rewarm it until it liquefies again. It'll be a bit darker every time you have to do it, but it's still fabulous to eat. Honey is a substantially healthier sweetener than, say, sugar. And if you store it properly, which means you keep it closed tightly so it can't suck in moisture, it'll last forever. Honey is great for baking. The amount of honey is different than what you would use relative to the amount of sugar. But the reason it's great for baking is it holds moisture and it keeps your baked goods nice and fresh. On the left is a photo of one of my favorite things. It's called bearding. And this photo was taken probably August based on the black-eyed Susans and the Queen's Anne lace growing in my apiary. And a colony in the summer will be about 50,000 bees. And Michigan, we can have 94 degrees and 94% humidity. And those bees are out pollinating all day long, bringing home nectar. And they come home at the end of the day and it's really hot inside the colony. And the nurse bees, the bees inside the colony, they don't want the bees in there. It's too hot. They're working really hard to keep it cool. So these are all the foragers who have come home at the end of the day and they're just sitting on the front porch, kicking back, talking about the fabulous flowers they saw and everything else. And it's called bearding. I love that. But I also love that photo because to me, when you think back to my story, honeybees saved me and gave me purpose after my first husband died. Honeybees, to me, are angels with real wings. I just love how they engage me and fascinate me. I got married again. After 2 years, I started dating, and here's a photo of my husband, Marshall, and I keeping bees together. I didn't intentionally go look for a beekeeper. Beekeeping is such a big part of my life, though. It sure was wonderful when Marshall turned out to not only fall in love with me, but fall in love with honeybees. And he became a far better beekeeper than I ever was. Queen Bee is in charge of everything, and I proposed to him, and we got married on a corner of my dad's farm. And on the left is my father witnessing, and on the right is Marshall's father witnessing our marriage vows. Although I'm not really sure witnessing is the right term because both of them were in their 80s. And I think both of them kind of nodded off throughout the wedding, but that was fine. The important people were there. So I told you in the beginning, this was a love story. It's about a love story about how I loved a man who was a beekeeper. And when he died, I became a beekeeper. And I loved bees. And I fell in love again and was lucky enough to be married to Marshall. I also warned you that it wasn't a happy love story. About a year ago, I woke up and found Marshall dead of a heart attack. Marshall had seen his doctor only months before and was pronounced wonderfully fit with the body of a 40-year-old. So how this happened, why this happened is a mystery to me. I've been pretty shattered and upside down since then. I'm forced to reevaluate everything. Marshall and I loved beekeeping. We did it full time and beyond. We had 40 colonies last year. I sold off, gave away, downsized to about 40, or I'm sorry, to 10. And I'm going to, I'll see what survives spring and then figure out what I'm going to do after that. I'm still really involved in bee education. I love honeybees. I love mentoring. I love speaking about them. I love sharing the magic of them. It's just really hard to no longer be doing it with the person whom I love so dearly. All the profits from everything, like I mentioned, go to charity. This book on the left is called Dronings from a Queen Bee, and it talks about the first 5 years. It's a humorous collection of anecdotes, everything I screwed up. If you love nature, if you think you love honeybees, that is the one. It's a great Mother's Day present. It's a great birthday present. It's just a fun romp about beekeeping. And then there's my kids' book on the right. Here are some resources, tons of resources out there. I teach the Kalamazoo Valley Community College course. It starts next week, Tuesday. The first 6 weeks are online. And after that, I hope that we can go to in apiary courses and actually go through the hives. To learn more about those, there is the website. It's kind of hard to find for me on the Kalamazoo Valley Community College website. So if you go there, get that link, email me, or maybe we can get that link put in the chats. But they we're still registering for that class, and it meets for a couple hours on Tuesday night. It meets 3 times if you sign up for 102 and 103, and hopefully 102 and 103 will be hands-on by that time. But it's under community if you go to the website and you don't have that link handy. I can't encourage you enough to join the Kalamazoo Bee Club. You don't have to live in Kalamazoo or Kalamazoo County. We cover pretty much all of Southwest Michigan, although there are other area bee clubs, maybe quite not as large or as established as ours. You can find us on Facebook. We have a very active social media presence. And you can find our website at kazoobeeclub.com. Oh, I'm sorry. That should say kalamazoobeeclub.com. Oh my goodness. Our email is kazoobeeclub@gmail.com. Our website is kalamazoobeeclub.com. Sorry about that. The third resource that I want to recommend is the Michigan Beekeepers Association, and they are located at michiganbees.org. Their conference starts February 24th online, and they're going to have an in-person conference, fingers crossed, March 12th. And that'll be in Lansing, and they'll have a beginner track. So if you're thinking about, geez, this sounds pretty cool, I think I want to do more, learn more, I come to that conference and maybe sign up for their in-person or their online beginning February 24th. We have hands-on apiary days at the Kalamazoo Bee Club. So if you are signed up, again, if you go to Kalamazoo, whole word, kalamazoobeeclub.com, and sign up for our newsletter, which is free. You can find out about our upcoming apiary days where we have protective wear, and you can come and get in hives and see what it's all about. That is all I have, folks. Jacob, questions?
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And I have to say, it was such a, I was so into it. And I'm sure everyone in the messages were sending you great wishes. And a lot of people really loved your speech. They're still coming in from the comments.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And it was really cool to see snapshots of your books. And again, that's hubbardhive.com. All profits go to charity. I just wanted to also thank you for recommending native plants. It's so important for especially our and everybody's environments to use natives as much as possible.
Yes, yes.
Again, thank you so much. I have a couple questions in the Q&A that I will go over, but just as a reminder, everyone's still in. There is still time to put your Q&A questions in, and Charlotte and I will be going through that in a moment. All right, let me just pull that up really quick.
I see the questions, Jacob, so I can take it.
Oh yeah. Oh, go right ahead.
Ellie asked, why do you use 10 frames instead of the popular 8 frame in the bee houses? Emily, those photos were taken when I first started, and I used 10 frame because my first dead husband started in 2006, and there wasn't a whole lot of 8 frame around at the time. I have since moved to 8 frame because they're lighter. And if you're thinking of getting started, I would absolutely go with 8 frame instead of 10 frame. I have, because I'm transitioning to 8 frame, actually even use some 5 frame. Great question. For baking with honey, Alex asks, is there a specific ratio of honey to sugar, or does that also vary by the pollen source? Another great question. A lot of people I know, and mainly it seems like, especially because of COVID, mainly I know beekeepers, and a lot of people I know bake exclusively with honey. They don't use sugar. And it's really dangerous for me to answer that question. I know that Google could answer it much more accurately because I can't remember the ratio, but it's something like a cup of sugar would only be 2/3 of a cup of honey. And again, don't quote me on that. But you would use lesser honey, and you can use exclusively honey in many recipes. Dina, I think I asked that or pronounced that correctly. Do you need to collect the honey, or can you just leave them alone? Great question. So if your colony is booming, they only need about 100 pounds to go through winter. A first-year colony might be challenged to get to 100 pounds, challenged by lots of things like disease, like bad weather. If we get, you know how it gets really dry late summer in Michigan, we might not have flowers so they can collect that critical 100 pounds. A couple of years ago, it rained all of August and September, which people were thinking, oh, that must be great for bees. No, it was just washing the nectar out. So all of us beekeepers ended up feeding colonies like crazy. But to answer your question, you don't have to collect the honey, but if you have a booming colony, you certainly can collect the honey. And the thing you have to do is to make sure they have enough room. It's weird. Bees will, instead of thinking about the next generation, when there's a honey flow on or a nectar flow on, when the world is exploding in nectar, they will fill every available cell in that colony up with honey. And the queen, meanwhile, the queen's going, excuse me, where am I supposed to be laying eggs? And she'll start thinking about swarming because she needs new room, further room for things. So it's this delicate balance about making sure they have enough honey and enough space to raise babies. So you don't have to collect the honey, but you have to make sure they have enough space or take away some honey. Emily asked another great question about how much time you spend tending to one hive a week. As a rough estimate, I just taught at Kalamazoo Bee Club's Bee School over the weekend for beginners, and it takes, we say, you'll probably spend about 30 hours across the season taking care of hives. I try to get into my hives, and you really need to be a beekeeper, get in and keep them and manage them and make sure everything's okay. You need to do that about every 10 days to 2 weeks. You'll do more of that April, May, June when they're getting going. If you have a problem like a high parasite count or you need to feed them, then you're getting in there more frequently. But generally across the season, 30 hours, the problem isn't so much how much time you have to spend, it's how much time you want to spend. Because as you can tell, I'm a little crazy and wound up about bees, but it's just fascinating. So you get in there, and when the bees are friendly and happy, which usually they are if you get in at the right time, you get to just wander about their home for a little bit and learn all sorts of stuff and see some amazing things happening, some amazing behavior, so to speak.
Awesome. We've had some great questions and great answers. Thank you, Charlotte. I'm gonna wait a couple more minutes just in case people are typing out some questions. I really love what you said about sowing white clover into your lawn to help feed bees. I read an article on alternative lawns. I thought that was a really cool way to both, keep a more traditional lawn while still supporting pollinators and other insects. And
Yeah,
I'm really happy you brought it up.
it has there's three downsides to it. First is I love to go barefoot. And most of my stings have occurred walking through the lawn barefoot because it's such a bee crazy place. And then I always feel bad. Not only do I feel bad because I stung, my foot got stung, but that honeybee died when I stung her. The second downside is I have a dog, and the dog just watches the bunny television show from the deck all day long because that white Dutch clover just attracts all sorts of bunnies. And the third, not a downside, but it's neighbor education, we'll say. I've got a bunch of neighbors who are all excited about lawn chemicals and how great their lawn looks. And I say, hey, here's a free jar of honey, and here's why we need honeybees. And I've gotten a couple neighbors to not be so chemical intensive, but you look at major institutions, hospitals, business parks, golf courses, a lot of chemical use there. And it looks beautiful, but it's not very pollinator friendly.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're a really good steward and educating people around you. And yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really important, especially when people talk about monarch way stations. You can get them certified and get a little plaque, and certainly help teach people without even without interacting with them sometimes, about why it may look a little bit messy, but it's really great for the environment around them.
Yeah. What is the talk tomorrow? There's another one tomorrow, right, Jacob?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I don't see any more questions, so I'm gonna take over sharing. Okay. And I will go over that in just one moment. Okay, so that was Charlotte Hubbard's talk, Beyond the Bee Knees. Thank you for attending this session of the Van Buren Conservation District's Backyard Symposium webinar series. We hope you'll enjoy us for more of the sessions. Message us using the contact form on our website at vanburen.org/contact-2/ or sign up for our newsletter using the subscribe option at the bottom of our website. This webinar is being recorded. Recorded webinars will be posted next week at www.youtube.com/user/vanburencd/videos. Follow us on Facebook at Van Buren CD and Instagram at VBCDMI.
Jacob, I'm trying to reply to Carrie, and I did not successfully do that. So Carrie, my answer was yes, contact a bee club, see if they'll take them, especially if they have bees at it. And I was in them, and I was wondering where you were located, because I might even come help you take care of that problem. Because I don't see it as a problem.
And Yvonne, okay, Abby, thank you for answering Yvonne's question. And you too, Emily. While we wait for Carrie to respond, I'm just gonna say that please remember there will be another presentation every day this week at 2 p.m. using the same link. And tomorrow's presentation will be Don't Spray, Let the Insects Pray. Given to us by the veteran and consumer horticultural educator, Chris Imler with Michigan State University Extension. And we hope to see you there. And yeah, looks like Carrie responded.
Yeah, Carrie, there isn't a real active location, bee club in Lawrence, but I can probably make a point to wander out there if they made it through the winter. So you see my contact information there below. My email is queenbeecharlotte, CHARLOTTE @gmail.com. And if you get a hold of me, let me know if they survive and we'll figure out what to do with them. Oh, great. Small world. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And thank you so much, Charlotte, for sharing your story and educating so much. I enjoyed it and so many others enjoyed it. And they
Thank
wish
you.
you best in your journey and everything else. All right.
Thank you. Good luck with your
Thank you.
program. Thanks for
Thank
letting
you
us
so
be a part
much.
of it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.